She's good. She's managing well, Baruch Hashem, and thank God, you know. Thank God.
And the chassan and his, are they recovering?
Yeah, they're all feeling well, and they're in New York now. Yeah.
What a story! This is a saga.
This is unbelievable, huh?
Yeah,
hello, Rabbi Shiner.
Hi, everyone. Okay, we're letting people into the meeting now.
Thank you for doing this for the community. We really appreciate it.
It's really a joy, and we have to thank Rabbi and Rebbezin Lipskar for joining us all the way from South Africa.
Yes, we heard the earlier Dlasha, and it was really beautiful and inspiring. I got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Okay, we're just letting everyone in, Rabbi and Rebbezin Lipskar. There's a waiting room in Mizakt, and everyone's coming in right now.
It's chair.
it's too big.
Okay, Rabbi Rebbezin Lipskar, we're ready to begin. I want to thank you very much for giving us your time all the way from South Africa. We're trying to unite the whole world as everyone feels a little bit isolated. We figure we could connect with Yidden all over the world and feel that we're really one big mishpacha all together, united. So first of all, I want to wish you a good Mayid, a good Yantif to you and your family. And we have the pleasure of having your daughter and son-in-law and grandson here. So we feel like our families are all connected and intertwined. And the format that we would like to go with is maybe first 15 minutes, share some words of inspiration about the Yontif of Pesach. And then the second 15 minutes of the segment, perhaps if you can tell us some personal anecdotes of what's going on in South Africa right now and your community in general. And then at the end, about a half hour, we'll do questions and answers. And anyone who has questions, just type your questions into the chat box and I'll ask the questions. So go ahead, Rabbi Lipskar.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
And Rebbezin Lipskar. Go ahead.
It's an absolute pleasure to join you and your community. We have wonderful, wonderful memories of our experiences there. You have a very special community. And even though this is far South Africa, today nothing is so far. We've learned bitterly and joyously that the world is really connected in so many different ways. You know, Pesach, so much has been said about Pesach. The idea of liberation, freedom, trying to get out of a personal situation which limits one and to get onto something which is higher and better. But essentially, Pesach, the Seder, it's a time for dialogue. It's a time for the exchange of ideas, questions and answers, and different types of people representing not only their own personalities and character, but to actually represent different views on how to truly understand and to accept the concept of Pesach. To some, it is, well, natural. You know it, you understand it, you've seen it in your home, in your parents' home, in your grandparents' home. To others, it's a bit of a, well, rage, anger, trying to distance oneself from one's roots. To others, it's, well, a bit of a bewildering situation. And there are those that just look at the whole situation and they are so overwhelmed by something that they have no idea of, that they simply, well, they sit there and look and wonder what it's all about. And interestingly, it's that child, that one, that the parent has to engage with. You can't let that child just sit there. And we call him the She'eni Yadei Elisha. We call him the one who can't ask. And I've said this a number of times to my congregation. There's a different way of translating the word She'eni Yadei Elisha. It's not that you can't ask, but you don't know if you're allowed to ask. You think that these are the rules, accept them or reject them, but don't ask any questions. This is the way we did it. This is the way we will continue to do it, either participate, but whatever it is, just be quiet. And that, of course, is a dangerous route because unfortunately, so many people actually don't understand and they look at this whole experience and they wonder, What is happening? Why am I here? Why am I sitting around this table? Why am I observing things that seem so peculiar and strange? However, let's get to the answer, and perhaps we'll come back to this in a moment. The answer, of course, is, what is the answer that the parent gives the child? We were slaves unto Pharaoh. We go all the way back in Jewish history. Because before any Jewish question can be answered, it has to be put into context. And the context is the entire history, development, growth, sometimes failures of the Jewish people. This is what the Haggadah is all about. We talk about glorious moments. We talk about tragic moments. We talk about moments that, as we say, our parents were idol worshippers, etc., etc. You have to put any Jewish question into the context of Jewish history, and Jewish history right from the beginning to the present day. Because if you're going to answer questions based upon current events or current values, not only are you going to limit the answer to a very specific geographic and chronological dimension, but you're also going to limit the ability of the individual who's listening to the answer to grow as a result. A legitimate question is not only some sort of intellectual exercise. Primarily, a question is something which worries me, disturbs me. It's something which stands in my way and I can't go further. I need an answer. I need clarity. I need to move forward. I need to grow intellectually, emotionally, physically, spiritually, psychologically, any which way. The fact is, a real question, not a theoretical question, not an absurd question, but a real question is something that comes from within. I am prepared to expose my character, my personality, myself by asking this question. And therefore, I hope and I expect the answer that I will get is one that is all-inclusive as well. It's not going to be limited to the here and now, because the here and now is limited by that very definition of here and now. And this is why the Seder experience is not only a time of dialogue, conversation, exchange, interaction, but it's also a time of understanding who we are, where we come from, and why we are who we are. And that takes tremendous, tremendous courage. Most people, for whatever reason, won't go back all the way in order to understand themselves within the context of who they are. You know, you ask a question, I'm going to say, well, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, who knows? They were somewhere in Russia and Poland and Hungary and any part of the world. What does that have to do with me here and now? My question is based upon experiences that I'm going through at this time in this place. And one thing we've learned historically, that those answers based upon limited situations are in fact not an answer at all, in many ways a lie. Because you've taken the question and you've taken the one who asked the question and you have limited their ability to receive something greater and better. The Seder is so important because we talk about liberation, we talk about freedom, we talk about ideas and concepts which are so great. But are we in fact listening to who's asking the question, and do we have the honesty and the courage and the wisdom to answer honestly as well? And that's why, what do we say? Avadim Hayina, we go all the way back to the story of the Jewish people, the origin of the people in a land of slavery, in a land of difficulty, in a time of difficulty, and the incredible, miraculous journeys they took from there, not only to Sinai to receive the Torah, but from there throughout history. And once we understand the experience collectively of the Jewish people, the answer becomes so much clearer as well. I am not the product of here and now. Yes, I was born at a specific time. I was born in a specific place. I was born to specific parents. But that is not who I am only. I am something which has within themselves a long history and the influence of all sorts of people throughout history. And as I said before, sometimes we were successful in that venture. Often we weren't successful in that venture. But the point is, it's important for me to understand who and what I'm at. And while it's difficult to achieve something like that in a Seder, how long does a Seder take? A couple of hours, more hours, but it doesn't take days and months and years, perhaps over a period of time. You've been through many Siddharim, which took years. But the point is that it's a beginning. It enables the individual to say, aha, I hear something great. I hear something different. I belong to a people that is timeless and ageless and has gone through a great many experiences, most of which can tell me something about the experience that I'm going through here and now. You know, Rabbi Shana, you mentioned earlier on about some of the experiences we've had here. Now, as you might know, South Africa is in a very, very strict lockdown. And the lockdown is that the president of the country, a couple of weeks ago, locked down for 3 weeks. You can't leave your home unless you're going to buy food or medicine. If you actually are on the street and you shouldn't be, you'll get arrested, you'll get thrown into jail, you'll get fined. A very strict lockdown. And people this year, I'm talking about our people, the Jewish community, they were petrified of how they were going to observe Pesach, the Seder. Every year they go, well, to this one's house or to that one's house, and they sit together and they socialize, and somebody runs the Seder. And here you have people on their own, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, but on their own, who've never run a Seder in their lives. And while we've done all sorts of, throughout the world, we've done all sorts of preparations, I'm sure you've done in your community as well, all sorts of preparations to help the people somehow go through that Seder. You wonder, how did it all pan out? So last night, right after Yom Tov, I sent a message to my community and I said, share with me some of the experiences you went through. And I got a letter from, electronic letter from a woman who lives with her mother. And in fact, almost every year they sit at our Seder. And this year, they didn't sit at our Seder, they sat at home. And she writes and says, dear Rabbi, I'm happy to tell you, one of the greatest Pesachs I've ever had. We had a little shul in the house, we put down the Siddur, and we sat and we prayed. And from the little shul, we went to the Seder, and we read through the Haggadah, and we translated everything. And we ate the matzah, and we drank the wine, and we went through everything that we've remembered. And we've asked questions and received answers, some better, some worse. But this has been a wonderful, wonderful Seder. And even though she missed being with friends, with family, with us, wonderful Seder. I get another letter, another congregant, a woman who lives on her own. And she said, this was the best Pesach I have ever had. I sat here with Haggadah. She mentioned she was using the Haggadah of Jonathan Sachs, and myself, and that was the entire Seder. What wonderful company. The first time I actually read through the entire Haggadah. And suddenly things become far more sensible and real. And these are not isolated stories. I'm sure in the next couple of days, weeks, we are going to hear thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of similar stories of people who are finally catching it, getting it, understanding a little bit more of what it's all about. Now, South Africa is not unique in that regard. People sat on their own throughout the world. People who never had to sit on their own. Who could have ever believed that this crazy, impossible situation would be thrust upon us? And what are we going to do? And we've learned a number of lessons. First of all, we can do it, even on our own. We have the ability, we have the capacity, and sometimes in a limited sort of way, we learn a lot more and we experience a lot more than going through the whole center and the whole experience of what the Seder is all about. And these stories will come to us one after the other, after the other, after the other. And they are stories of inspiration and growth. And as I told my community before Yom Tov, I said to them, let's not get too used to it because we might begin to enjoy this. And while we're all talking about, normally we say at the end of the Seder, the Shana Haba Yerushalayim, they say next year in person. While we all hope to sit with family and friends very soon. But some people will actually say to themselves, I would like to have this personal experience again. I did it on my own. The answer becomes clear. Instead of worrying about what the menu is going to be and who am I going to do and are my clothes just right? Suddenly all of that was really not important. What was important is that there was a Haggadah, and I read the Haggadah and I asked the questions, and I'm sure as rabbis we're going to get a lot of questions. We better have the answer. But the point is, this has been a different type of experience. This has been an experience of great learning. And I dare say, I can only speak for myself, I dare say that, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of shiurim, of Torah lessons and sermons haven't taught as much to people as their own personal experiences this year, Pesach. And I say that because we all ask questions. We're all bewildered. No matter who we are, what we do, we're all bewildered. The impossible has happened. Something that we could never believe, something that existed in science fiction books and thrillers. Suddenly, this has become part and parcel of our own lives. It's not a story of the past. It's not a story that, but in order to understand what's happening, we have to go into the past because we have to know how, as Jews, are we going to go through these situations and make it real. So we sit at home in lockdown, can't go into the street unless you're going to buy some food. Whatever social exchange there is electronic, on the phone, on the Zoom, and this one and that one, and Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp. But at the end of the day comes Yom Tov, I am sitting at the table, either all by myself, or with a parent, or with a spouse, or with one child, or a number of children. Mashi and I have been very fortunate that for the first time in many years, we've been with children that normally we could never be with on Pesach. Our daughter was in America and she was going back to China where they live, and they have children in Israel, and the only place they could actually come to and to be together was here in South Africa. And we have children in Mauritius who came here on a shopping trip. They come here right before Pesach to buy supplies for themselves and the community in Mauritius, and they got stuck here. And in hours, it's a 4-hour flight away from Johannesburg, Mauritius is. And within hours, my daughter was here. We got in touch with my son-in-law, her husband, and said, you better get on a plane because by tomorrow morning, the airports are going to be in lockdown and you're going to be all on your own and you won't be able to participate in your own community because Mauritius was going into lockdown as well. Suddenly, everything changed. Everything became crazy. And, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I wouldn't be speaking the day before Pesach as I'm speaking now. I wouldn't have the chutzpah. I wouldn't have the courage to tell people it's going to be fine. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be great. It's going to be the best you've ever had. I wouldn't say that because it would be patronizing and in a sense insulting. What I would say is to give people chizuk, strength, courage to go through the experience on their own. But now, having heard what people have gone through and how they've handled it, and these incredible stories that come pouring in, I myself am incredibly inspired by the strength, the faith, the ability of our people to rise to any challenge. And yes, I have no doubt whatsoever. As many joyous stories, we'll hear some stories that are pretty sad. People who couldn't handle it on their own. And to them our hearts go out, no question about it. But at the same time, the tenacity and strength, the fortitude of our people is something which is overwhelming and great. So these are my thoughts as I sit here the day after the first days of Yom Tov, and not only that, but a Shabbos thrown into boot. And as I said, inspired by the stories, I don't want to call them the simple folk of our community, but people who thought of themselves as the simple folk and who could never in a million years run a Seder. And here's a woman on the road, 2 women on the road, an old man who is physically challenged. And to him, it was a great Pesach sitting in his wheelchair, and story after story after story. There we are. And South Africa is a great place. We have an old age home here called Sandringham Gardens. And Sandringham Gardens is an old age home, a wonderful old age home. We're taking care of, over here, the Chevra Kadisha take care of Jewish social services. It's a huge enterprise and a wonderful undertaking. Weeks before Pesach, weeks before anything happened, they put the old age home on lockdown because they were people who were challenged. They were at-risk people, elderly people. They had them all tested. They were all negatively tested. They locked the doors, and no one can come in, no one can go out. Deliveries are done for whatever the case might be, but there is no interaction with the community outside. And suddenly, they became famous because after shuls were in lockdown, people couldn't say Kaddish, people couldn't name babies. And the word got out that in the old age home in Sandringham Gardens, there is a minyan on a daily basis, and they are saying Kaddish for whoever asks. The Kaddish should be said for a certain soul, or baby naming. We get videos every single day of people who've had their babies named in that wonderful place. We have a dear friend who lives in London, and it was yahrzeit for her husband in London, England. And she was distraught because, well, who would say Kaddish? You couldn't say Kaddish in America. All the shuls were closed as well, where her children live. And we were talking, and I said, listen, let's try this. She was overjoyed. We suddenly get requests from all over the world. How do we join? How can we link up with this particular minyan? And here we see incredible innovation, incredible opportunity, unity, connecting throughout the world. A bunch of elderly, and they're loving it, these elderly guys. They think that they are the bee's knees. They are talking to the world. They are world famous. Their pictures and their videos, and they take these videos of every family who asks for, well, if it's not on Yom Tov and Shabbos, of course. But otherwise, well, there you are. Things like this happen. When the chief rabbi, Dr. Warren Goldstein, closed the shuls a week before the country closed down, and he felt that it would be necessary to close the shuls because we were getting terrible reports from around the world. So he closed the shuls right away, and he was fully supported by the Rabbanim, by all the rabbis in the community. And again, he was telling me that it was with great pain that he made that decision. He, together with the Beth Din, it was with great pain, but at the advice of senior medical people, they felt this was an absolute necessity. And all of us as rabbis thought, how is the community going to survive without the communal services of a shul? You know, and the rest of the world, Shabbos day is the big moment for the shul. In South Africa, it's Friday night for a variety of reasons. How will people? And the funny thing is that people again rose to the occasion. And the interesting thing is that people who often, almost never come to shul other than the 3 days a year, they were terribly distraught. What's going to happen? The shuls are being closed. And you think to yourself, it's totally irrelevant as far as they're concerned, but no, it was something which worried them. It's something which made them think. And this is a time that we have to hold on to all those stories, all those thoughts about people going through situations, you know, during lockdown for weeks on end. It was hilarious. When I say hilarious, our children who, well, live a couple of kilometers away in Johannesburg, and other children who were from overseas who were in quarantine in different places in Johannesburg. And we are here and we can't see our own children. And it's strange and it's weird, but you learn how to communicate differently. And it's not only communication thousands of miles away, but around the corner as well. And the amount of chesed, the amount of kindness. I'm not talking about charity, people who don't have. This is something which happens every year before Pesach, where the community comes together and raises funds, either individual communities or the entire community, raising funds for those who are less fortunate. We're talking about chesed, of going shopping for old people, of making sure that the Seder in a box was everybody's home, that people had wine and people had matzah and people had. It was an overwhelming response of unity, of consideration, of kindness, of sharing. You know, last night I opened my phone and I was looking through the various, stuff that came in. And I saw that incredible picture. I don't know which town in Israel it was, where the entire town almost, you know, standing on their porches and singing together, Manishtana Halayla Hazeh. And you think to yourself, wow. And it's not only, it indicates an essential and infinite and timeless and total bond that we have with each other. Here we are, talking to friends halfway around the world. What are we talking about? Something which is common to all of us, because every one of us is interested. What is going on? And how can we share? And what do we know? And that's why it's so important to communicate as best we can right now. First of all, because this is inspired me, it'll inspire others, I'm sure, as well. But to give each other strength, to share with strength. You have strength, you're obligated to share that strength with someone else. So this is the story here in South Africa. Maybe Mashi would like to add one or two things, by all means.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi Lipskar. And I'll tell you, everything you're saying really resonates because we're in two parts of the world, but we're having the similar experiences here. And you started with the question of Sheni De Elishal means don't be afraid to ask questions. And there's a question maybe that people are afraid to ask is, why would a good God do something so horrific to the world? Why would we go through this? What's the meaning? What's the purpose? And I think you brought out a beautiful purpose, that is, we come to realize our own strength, and that we shouldn't just rely on others to observe Yiddishkeit for us. We have to muster our own courage to do it ourselves. And I think that's a point that is overlooked, that we really discovered a part of ourselves we never knew. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you know this, but yesterday my two younger boys wanted to go see Ellie, so we walked over the bridge, and Yossi and Sarah were sitting with Ellie in the house, and my kids sat outside on the floor, and they played Monopoly, and Yossi moved all the pieces for everyone. They had a whole game of Monopoly. But when we walked back over the bridge, it was already nighttime. I walked by one of my members' home, who's a single man. He lives alone, a man in his 60s maybe, and he saw me, and we greeted each other, Good Yantif. And one of the things that Sarah organized before Yantiv is that we sent every member a box of Shmur Matzah and a new Haggadah written by Rabbi Tzvi Friedman, a very creative, like a hip, modern, out-of-the-box type of Haggadah, something that people typically don't have. We figured everyone has an Haggadah, but maybe something a little more fun and creative. And this fellow, I won't say his name, but he said he was full of smiles, and he says, Rabbi, he said, that Haggadah saved my Pesach. He said, I sat with that Haggadah. I had so much fun reading that Haggadah. And this is a man who I'm sure never in his life ever sat alone by a Seder, because he has a family and friends and a lot of invitations. But he said that Haggadah made his Pesach. And you're right, it was a different experience. And maybe people discovered how just a Jew and a good sefer and a good book could make an evening glorious. You don't need others to step in and create the ambiance.
Rishani, you better stop there. We're out of a job.
Well, that's true. Our jobs are in jeopardy right now. But I think Hashem wants us to realize that everyone has to be a leader, and everyone has to do their part. And we have to start by leading ourselves, obviously. And we have the power within us that we have to discover. So thank you for that. Rebbezin, Mashi, if you share a woman's perspective of Pesach in South Africa.
Good night. I'm not sure that that's really where I want to start, but as my husband was speaking, something came to mind that's been happening around the world, and that's the initiation of writing unity Torahs, where everyone takes a letter, and together we have this common Torah that's being written. And it's happened here in our community. The rabbi of one of our big Chabad shuls was very, very ill. Thank God he came home last night after weeks and weeks of intense prayer and difficulty. It's difficult to imagine what the doctors are seeing, what people are going through, what families are going through. And of course, here and there, we are very deeply affected by something that's happening in our own families, communities, neighborhoods. And it was happening right here with one of our colleagues. And one of the communal responses was to sponsor, to write a community Torah where everyone would participate, where together we would be able to do something positive that actually exemplifies unity. Because we're taught that each one of us has our own letter in the Torah, that we're all part of the nation, but the 600,000 letters of the Torah represent 600,000 general souls, and that it's a mitzvah for a Jew to write a Torah or to participate in the writing of a Torah or sponsoring a Torah, not necessarily to write your own letter, but to contribute. And we're going to have a unity Torah amongst all our communities. This has happened all over the world. It's also known that this combats illness. It's been pointed out in a special story. So that's been inspiring because we have our own scribe here. And on our Zoom communal gathering for the Rebbe's birthday, 3 days before Pesach, that was actually depicted. We were able to go to his home and see it and hear from various of the Rabbonim and so on. Generally, because I'm a teacher, it's impacted me before it impacted on me as a woman on Erev Pesach, as a teacher, and our schools closed down. And amazingly, how the administration and the teachers were able to rise to the occasion, and each one to prepare work for the children, to communicate with the children by various technological methods that keep on being refined. And again, unity. We were able to gather information from the best around the world. And even as we go forward, South Africa has been locked down for an additional 2 weeks. And our new term will not begin next week in the classroom, but it's going to begin again via the various methods that have been tried and have been upgraded and updated and so on, to make sure that our children continue to progress, whether they're nursery school children, elementary, high school, and so on. So there's lots going on, lots has been demanded of us before we could actually think of being balabostas in our own homes and addressing Pesach issues. And then Erev Pesach. And my husband and I are considered too old to actually just go out and expose ourselves and so on. And our kids have been wonderful. We've been looked after. We were self-quarantined for several weeks. And it was a full week and a half before the lockdown. And it's learning an entire different way of depending on others, appreciating what others do. We're the givers. Here, we're able to give others the joy of giving, and we have to be good receivers. It's not something that's easily adapted to. We love getting out, running around, doing for others. But as my husband spoke, it's important to be able to think out of the box, to think differently. And of course, it connects us to our history. We've had, thank God, a particularly privileged existence. And to be able to put ourselves into the position that our ancestors have been in so many times, even in recent history, in countries where they didn't enjoy what we enjoy. It's very important for us to understand, and we can now understand a whole lot better what was only a story before. What was it like to be a Marrano in Spain? What was it like to try and make a bit of Pesach in a concentration camp during a pogrom, God forbid, thrown into a dungeon by a poritz, a landowner, for not paying the rent, and Pesach is coming, what do you do? And to understand that God appreciates anything that comes from the heart. And probably in recent history, there hasn't been so much divine service connecting with God as there has been in the last couple of weeks, and particularly over this Pesach. And to remember, and the words now become real, that God cherishes sincerity. He cherishes wholeheartedness. Obviously, as my husband said, you go to shul, what shall I wear? What time should I go? What page must I read? Where are they up to? And all of that. And here it was as these two dear friends of ours, these women, they set up a shul in their home. Because after lighting their Shabbos candles, their Yom Tov candles, they explained to us, they normally enjoy shul. So they put Sidurim at the table facing each other and they prayed. And then they moved into the Seder. And they had to now assume the positions of the rabbi, the rabbi's family, the listeners, the takers, and now they had to be the givers. And when this woman explained that how they went to the gate to greet Elijah the prophet, she said, we did the whole thing. And we asked from the depths of our souls that Hashem make the world better. It was a meaningful experience. It wasn't just, I'm going to the gate to ask for what I need, but suddenly I see myself as pivotal in bringing about change to the world. I can ask, and what am I going to ask for? I'm going to ask for something for others as well. And so it's been an education. I'm sure it's going to take a long time for us to digest and to realize the gift actually that is inherent in this. As you said, why would a good God do this? Because as any good parent knows, when your child takes on responsibility, that's when he really grows.
You know, I quipped before, I made a joke with Rabbi Shiner, we better be careful of our jobs, you know, the guys are going to do this on their own right now. It was not entirely a joke, because every one of us, we're all going to have to change our ways really after this experience. And, you know, as rabbis, very often we're reticent. We pull back a bit and don't demand as much as we should from individuals. You know, too much, they won't. This experience has shown us people are incredibly capable of doing great things. And everybody's going to have to change. You know, this situation has impacted not only our social life, our religious life, the economy. It's altogether different. And I think that we are in for a very good thing after this. You know, I don't like using such words. I'm only talking about it because it can be, as I said before, a bit patronizing. But the point is, everything is changing. Everything is changing. And well, I'm personally thrilled so far with what I've heard. And I've seen the responses of people, the levels of unity, the ability, the creativity, well, we're going to get this done and we're going to get it done well. I see we're running out of time, so if you wanted to ask some questions, some of your congregants or whoever listening.
If anyone has any questions, please post them on the chat and then I'll ask it to Rabbi Lipskar. But while you post your questions, since you are one of the senior shluchim of the Rebbe and you have the koyach of the Mishaleach, the one who sent you, the Rebbe in you, if you had to channel what the Rebbe's message would be at such a moment to the Jewish people, based on having heard the Rebbe speak so many times and learned his sichos, obviously it's nobody could know what the Rebbe would say at such a moment, but if there were certain themes that the Rebbe would turn to perhaps in situations like this, is anything come to mind that you think the Rebbe would want us to focus on, particularly now under these circumstances?
A number of things actually, and I'm pleased that you asked that question because I've thought about it, well, at length. And you know, you're 100% right. You know, we can't really know what the Rebbe would say or wouldn't say. But a couple of things that I think he would have said. And that is number one, that, you know, we have a tradition. God told us that he always sends the remedy before the illness. And it's there. It's not that we're going to walk around blindly, God forbid, in this situation. The remedy is there. All we have to do is find it. And please, God, we find it quickly. And equally so, to talk about the capacity of an individual to do great things, to strengthen faith, to bring about a state of unity, to care about other people. What we've been talking about really is all based, I think, on the message and thinking of the Rebbe over the years, the ability to come together. You know, I vividly remember when I was a much younger person, the Rebbe's message and teaching and voice during the 6-Day War. And certainly at the beginning, the first couple of days in the Western world, I was studying in Montreal at the time, but people were falling apart. People were falling apart. What do we do? Let's get our family out of Israel. And the Rebbe was adamant. He was strong. Israel's the safest country in the world. And people wondered, what is the Rebbe talking about? And we know how that turned out. The point is that from time to time, God gives us challenges, opportunities, situations that make huge demands on our lives. And we have the ability to do it. You know, the Rebbe always spoke about that Misha Yeshlo Mana Rotzamatayim, a person who has 100 portions wants 200 portions, because we have the ability and the capacity to develop and to grow and to raise our levels on so many different situations. And this is something that we have to work at and fight for and develop. The Rebbe would only encourage us to do better and greater things. I think at the same time, the Rebbe would caution us to listen to the professionals, particularly the medical professionals, because safeguarding human life was and is, well, a central priority in Jewish life. But at the same time, even though we have to do it from a distance and we have to use all sorts of creative methods to reach out to others, as you yourself told the story, walking back over the bridge and popping into an elderly congregant on their own, and that individual's life changed. I'm not familiar with the level of lockdown in Florida. I can imagine what it's like, but I only talk about here. Here it's very, very severe, and you know, we find it very difficult to move around and to do what has to be done. But nonetheless, it's done. Somehow the Shmura Matzah went out. Somehow the Haggadot went out. Somehow, whatever we had to do. And one of the refuah, the refuah coming before the illness is what we're doing right now. The fact that we have this technology to interact and to exchange and to teach and to share and to see each other's faces and to hear each other's voices. This is a wonderful remedy. This is something which is a great blessing as well if we use it correctly.
I'd just like to say that what comes to mind is when one looks at what has happened with Chabad, for example, and the growth of Chabad throughout the world in the last 40 years. And through whom did the Rebbe do these things? Through individuals who really were not necessarily that trained or talented or whatever, but they had passion. They believed that the Rebbe's vision should be carried out and looked at it as a privilege. And what has been accomplished is nothing short of a miracle. And perhaps now, from this springboard, from the springboard of this gift, which is hidden inside a difficulty, perhaps, just perhaps, many of us will take our innate abilities of leadership and develop them and bring them to the fore, because there are so many of our brothers and sisters who don't come to shul, with whom the rabbi and the Rebbezin will never have contact. But those of us who do go to shul, those of us who do hear what the rabbi says, or do conduct their own seder, or do read, or are on this Zoom, know of many, many people who would really enjoy a kind word, an encouraging WhatsApp, a phone call, and that warmth, that's leadership.
You know, we recently had a very interesting experience here in South Africa about 6 weeks ago. We have it once a year where the rabbis, and we have a large group of rabbis in South Africa, we get together for training purposes, for a conference. And I'm not going to mention names, but we had a very well-known rabbi from New York, runs one of the big modern Orthodox synagogues there. And we had wonderful sessions with him, a very intelligent, articulate, warm person. And just before Yom Tov, we were having these Zoom conferences with the rabbis, and we asked them to say a few words. And as I said before, I don't think his thinking would be that way normally. But he says, we often thought, the impossible could never happen, and suddenly it happened. And he said that he was speaking in the, on Friday night, he spoke in the shul of one of our Chabad rabbis, who told him that the Rebbe said things would be good in South Africa until Mashiach. And at the time, he thought it was a wonderful, interesting concept. But the concept of Mashiach was very theoretical. It was a Jewish concept, it's part of our faith. We believe in it strongly, but it was out there somewhere. He says he looks out the window, lives in New York City, and he sees that traffic has come to a standstill. There's nobody in the street, etc. And everything, the most mighty of nations, brought to their knees. And suddenly he said the concept of Mashiach has become real in his life. He says, everybody, in one way or another, whether we use the words or not, we can hear the Geula, we can hear that something spiritually, universally dramatic is happening. And these are things that we're learning right now that perhaps yesterday people were either afraid to articulate or didn't know how to articulate, even to themselves, even in their own minds. The impossible concepts are very, very real right now. And this is why it's a special time.
That's beautiful. Just a question, how is it affecting the Afrikaner population? Is anti-Semitism something you experience on a regular basis in South Africa? We know the government is not very friendly towards Israel necessarily, but is this bringing people together who otherwise wouldn't, or is it bringing out more of the racial divides?
Strangely enough, while there is a strong anti-Israel sentiment here in South Africa because of the government and others, we don't really experience much anti-Semitism in this country, other than anti-Israel and anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. So that is not really an issue as far as we are concerned. The real problem here in South Africa is the huge divide between the haves and the don't haves. And those who live, we growing up in North America, you don't really comprehend the fact that millions of people can live in shacks. And God forbid if the illness hits those areas, it'll be a disaster. That's why perhaps the government took such strong action. But the point is, there's a huge need right now to reach out to everybody with food, with money, with whatever the case might be. And a sense of, I feel a huge sense of responsibility. The challenge for the Jewish community here now is not anti-Semitism that is being experienced throughout the rest of the world. You don't have that intensity here. It's the need to do something as far as the vast majority of people are concerned. Because while the country has had tremendous changes, it still has a long way to go to bring about some sense of true concern one for another. But you guys will have first-hand information because the American ambassador to South Africa is none other than a person in your own community, and we're thrilled that she's here. And I'm sure you can get.
I forgot about that. Lana Marks and Neville are out there with you right now, exactly. So
I think they're back in America. I think all the Americans had to fly home or something.
Oh, you think they're back?
I'm not sure.
Interesting. But, I'll reach out to her this afternoon.
That's an amazing connection between our country and your community. That a Jewish woman from an Orthodox community becomes the American ambassador to South Africa.
Wow. You reminded me. I'll call her this afternoon to see where she is. Are there outreach programs from the Jewish community to the have-not, to the poorer community in South Africa going on right now?
Many. It always has been many. Something called Africa Tikkun, all sorts of private, smaller, bigger. But Chabad has a huge program. building libraries in these poor areas. And they went out before Yontif with hand sanitizers and masks and things that people would have no access to otherwise. And quite a bit was given. There are all sorts of activities, not enough.
You know, it's amazing, being that this is the month of redemption, and that one remembers how 26 years ago the Rebbe said, 26 more, 28, the Rebbe said to that CNN reporter, that's all that's left to bring the Mashiach is goodness and kindness. And what a setting today is for goodness and kindness. What else can you do for people? What do people need? And exactly the point that you're making. This is really, I mean, avenues for goodness and kindness are open and are opening more and more each day.
It reminds me of a wonderful story some years ago. Friends of ours have a magnificent game farm out in the country, a few hours drive from Johannesburg. And one of the things that they have on this vast estate that they own is a school for the local kids. You know, they built a school and they pay for teachers, etc. And we went to visit the school, and we could see that they were not supplied well enough. So we came back, we came to the students of our own school, Torah Academy, and we gave them this challenge that here's a community and they need books and pens and whatever kids need, you know, the materials to whatever, a million things.
Yeah.
And a truckload was filled within 2 or 3 days. And the truck drove to, well, this place out in the country. And the joy of it, and there it is, you know, and we take these things for granted, you know, an extra pen, an extra book, an extra bottle of cleaning material, or, you know, whatever the case is. It's a time that we have to really get out there and care. One thing we have learned in this situation, we're all together in this one. You know, there's no lists and there's no divisions, you know, rich, poor, intelligent, black, white, whatever. There's no racial separation over here. There's no social separation. This thing it hits everybody. And this is why the concern has to be universal in a response to everybody as well.
I think there's an amazing thing that occurs to me, and that is that when we look around our homes, we really don't need all the stuff, as it were. We're just too busy all the time. We collect, we buy, and the little bit that one gives, you look around, it helps everybody. We don't really need all that stuff. And to somebody else, it is literally joy. It fills their lives. It's the answer to a dream, to a hope. And here's an opportunity where our schedules, our diaries have been cleared, where we can think of others. And with what? We can't go out and buy necessarily, whatever. Just look around. Yes, I have extra clothing, cleaning material, so on and so forth. And what joy it can bring to both.
Rabbi Shiner, I see that you're sitting with a smile on your face. Wonderful.
He often smiles, Rabbi Shiner.
Well, you enthralled us with a lot of wisdom, and I'll just tell you that one of the comments I got here, because I checked my phone for comments and questions, and one of the comments someone wrote is, I understand better now where Sarah gets all her wisdom from.
From her mother.
They don't say who. They just say from both of you, apparently. So thank you for joining with us. And, you know, you said that one of the prayers that some people said at the end of the Seder is Lashana Haba in person, Biyachad, I guess. And so great seeing you on Zoom, but it'll be even better when we see you back here in Palm Beach, God willing, only in good health and for Simchas. And when we get through this together, we'll be better off, begashmius u'beruchnius, God willing, physically and spiritually improved and renewed and refreshed.
We certainly look forward to our next visit to Palm Beach, but you're always welcome here in South Africa as well.
Thank you very much.
Love to see you here.
It would be a
good night and a lot of love to your entire community.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we know the hour is late in South Africa, so thank you so much for coming on at this hour. And
an absolute pleasure. An absolute pleasure. Kol Tov, thank you very much.
A good Yantiv. Chag Sameach. A good Yantiv.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining.
We have
Thank you.
another
See you
caller.
later.
Thank everyone for joining. We have the next session is at 5 o'clock with the Rabbi of Mauritius, Africa.
Oh,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining, Amy.